Good afternoon. This is your 28storms.com tropical weather update for Saturday, June 25th. The National Hurricane Center still is not apparently too concerned about the tropical disturbance now in the western Caribbean, but I have a feeling that this feature will deserve a little bit more monitoring as it begins to move off toward the Yucatan Peninsula and the southwest Gulf of Mexico and Bay of Campeche. The main feature continues to be a tropical wave now approaching the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua as it interacts with the monsoon trough along Central America. As we can see in this afternoon's visible imagery, convection remains very abundant, but it still is widely disorganized with convection spanning across much of the western Caribbean and into the eastern Pacific. As noted yesterday, one of the key questions will be how much of this convection can make it into the far northwest Caribbean so that this system can have a little bit more water to work with before it continues to move more westward into the land masses of Central America. It will also be interesting to see what dominant area of convection begins to take shape as we have some competing areas. Of course, this one here that's beginning to pop up in the far northwest Caribbean and also this area in the eastern Pacific. Neither one of these two features are all that organized just yet, one being here in the eastern Pacific and the other just off the coast of Honduras. But it almost looks like the one off the coast of Honduras wants to become the more dominant feature, and that's what some of the models are trying to pick up on. And interestingly enough, if we can get a mid-level or low-level circulation begin to develop out in this area over the next 24 hours, then we could have a developing disturbance heading toward Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula. It still does not appear that anything will like to develop in the Caribbean, but over time this could be more of a player for the Bay of Campeche and southwest Gulf of Mexico, especially if we have an organizing feature before the system even arrives in that area. I'm still a bit concerned about this system because although some of the model guidance has backed off over the last 36 hours, the upper level environment near the Yucatan Peninsula is beginning to gradually improve for tropical cyclogenesis. As noted yesterday, this upper level ridge that was once over Costa Rica and Panama is beginning to lift up toward the northwest as this associated trough to the north begins to continue lifting toward the north. Although we still have some west and northerly wind shear, you can see denoted by these dashed blue lines near Honduras and the Yucatan that upper level winds are steadily decreasing, as noted here by the Sims wind shear analysis. And here's the overall representation of the wind speeds and direction. As noted before, we have some slight west-northwest wind shear, but overall we're supposed to see more of an upper level ridge begin to take shape across the western Caribbean over the next 2 to 3 days. The 850 millibar vorticity product from the SIMS website is also beginning to pick up on that possible development of at least a low-level vorticity center off the coast of Honduras that we saw in the latest visible. Once again, we don't see anything all that impressive on today's visible imagery, but if anything, there may be a very weak mid-level turning out here off the northeast tip of Honduras. And we'll just keep an eye on that overnight. If it persists overnight and lingers into tomorrow morning, then this will more than likely continue heading west-northwest over the open waters of the Gulf of Honduras and the western Caribbean Sea. And if it were to persist for another 12 to 18 hours, then that could definitely be an area to watch as it continues to move in that direction. As noted yesterday, the low-level steering underneath the large Atlantic subtropical ridge continues to suggest a continued west-northwest motion over the Yucatan Peninsula over the next 24 to 48 hours before it begins to move on into the Bay of Campeche and southwest Gulf. Thereafter, we expect the mid-level ridging over much of the central United States to make a comeback and then continue pushing anything down here off toward the west into mainland Mexico. There is also some model support to keep an eye on the Gulf of Honduras over the next 24 hours. This is the latest 12Z EC MWF, and I have things really zoomed in so that you can get a better feel for what you're looking at. This is the coast of Honduras right along here. Here is Belize. This is the upper Yucatan Peninsula. Cozumel and Cancun are up here. This is the Bay of Campeche, and mainland Mexico is off toward the west over here. If you notice, the model may already be correctly keying in on the 850 millibar potential low-level vorticity center off the northeast tip of Honduras, as we noted on the visible. And as I advance this to day 1 or 24 hours, we really begin to see that the vorticity and a aforementioned or associated surface low begins to develop near the coast of Belize. Again, this is potentially by tomorrow morning. And by 48 hours, it's already beginning to move into the southeast Bay of Campeche. Not at a very strong low, but certainly strong enough to really be worth monitoring for any chance of tropical development. And it's expected to continue moving more toward the west, but at a very slow rate over the Bay of Campeche. And as you can see, it's really beginning to amplify here. And this could be a tropical depression or tropical storm As you can see, it maxes out in intensity in 96 hours or 4 days from now, before moving into mainland Mexico near Tampico at around day 5. And here's the sea level pressure forecast. As you can see, day 1, or the current time, we don't have anything out there right now. But by tomorrow, the model does develop a weak 1008 millibar low pressure center near the coast of Belize. By Monday morning, the model has the main low pressure center already in the southeast Bay of Campeche, but still at only 1008 millibars. And then by 72 hours or Tuesday morning, it begins to show a little bit sign of organization. In 96 hours, it's trying to make a run at tropical depression or tropical storm status, just as it's beginning to make landfall near mainland Mexico. And by 120 hours or day 5, it's beginning to weaken over the inland area. And this is less of a zoomed in view. You can see the whole basin here, and here's our tropical system at 96 hours about to make landfall. This is a rather noteworthy run because not only is the ECMWF one of the better forecast models, but all along over the past 4 to 5 days, the European model has been the least bullish out of all of the dynamical models that we have. It hasn't been showing that much in the way of development. It still really isn't, but this is the strongest run yet from the European model. And unlike the other models, this one is actually beginning to lift more toward the north. It's giving it more room to develop out here over the Gulf of Honduras and then eventually, of course, the Bay of Campeche. And, you know, as long as we have that convection in that same exact area where the model has this beginning to take shape over the next 24 hours, it certainly bears some watching despite what the other models may be showing at the current time. As always, though, we take a look at every single model at our disposal, and here's the latest 12Z GFS run. And as we begin to step this forward into time, the model really keeps most of the energy, or low-level energy, focused over Central America and the far northeast Pacific, but it does take a weak low into the extreme southern Bay of Campeche, more than likely too far to the south and close to land to really do much with this system in terms of organization. But it just keeps much of the energy over Central America throughout the foreseeable future. And in fact, by day 7, it's beginning to try to develop yet a second area of low pressure. In this case, the GFS thinks that this one will be the primary low that eventually lifts into the Gulf of Mexico and tries to develop into a tropical cyclone. You know, that's an alternative scenario, but there's really no other model support for this at this time. And this is about the 3rd time the GFS has backed off on the development of a low, only to create a second low further down the road. So we'll keep this one in mind, but as of right now, I think the European is more likely. But as always, we'll keep a close eye on things. The 12Z no gaps is very similar. It keeps much of the low-level vorticity near or very close to mainland Mexico, and therefore it really doesn't show much in the way of development. The latest Canadian run is a bit interesting because it doesn't develop anything in the Bay of Campeche, but at the same time it almost appears to be focusing too much energy in the far northeast Pacific. And as we saw in the satellite, there is a chance for some organization at least out there, but it almost looks like the Western Caribbean is where things are trying to make something happen the most right now. And the model may incorrectly be overdoing this vorticity near the Gulf of Tehuantepec too much, and even though it does that, it still tries to refocus some of the energy into the Bay of Campeche over the next 48 to 72 hours. So I thought that was somewhat interesting. And as has been repeated for the last 3 days now, anything that does develop in the Southwest Gulf or Bay of Campeche over the next 5 to 6 days will be more of a threat to Mexico than anywhere along the United States Gulf Coast. This is the 5-day ECMWF ensemble forecast pattern average, and all the ensemble members apparently agree with each other that a large dome of subtropical ridging will persist here over the central United States during that time, in which we think that a low could be forming down there and moving its way on off toward the west in the general direction of Tampico, Mexico. So as of right now, we don't think this disturbance will be able to get its act together in enough time to develop before it begins to move into the Yucatan Peninsula and Belize, although residents along that peninsula can expect heavy rainfall potentially over the next 2 days, along with an increase in gusty winds. And we will see a greater chance of development if this low can make it into the Bay of Campeche and Southwest Gulf. And now that is being advertised by the 12Z ECMWF. It doesn't show significant intensification, but it still continues the possibility that we could see a tropical depression or a tropical storm quickly form before it begins to head off into mainland Mexico, where it will dissipate for good. So stay tuned to 28storms.com. We will have another update for you by tomorrow afternoon, and we will be monitoring the progress of this system as it continues to show at least some indication that it may develop down the road.